Hi, what's up? Welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Emma, aka Midsummer Knits, and today's video is going to be a podcast episode. I actually have a couple of really exciting updates this time for you guys. I finally have a couple of FOs and I'm super excited to show them, so let's get into it. So first of all, as you can probably see, I'm wearing one of my recent FOs, which is the Luna tee, and I'm super excited about this one. It took me around a month to make, so I started it on April 20th and I finished it on May 20th. And considering this is a project that is made entirely out of fingering weight yarn, I think this is a pretty good amount of time, at least for me as a bit of a slower knitter. I'm really excited that it's now done, and I absolutely love how this came out. So if you guys have been following my channel for a bit, you might know that I've been wanting to make the Luna tee for quite a while. I included it in my summer patterns inspiration video, which was a couple of months ago, and I've just had it on my list to make for probably like a year now. Ever since I saw the designer Charissa Lamb post about the Luna tee on Instagram, I just loved the design. I love the simplicity of it. It is this really simple mock neck raglan tee, and I just like the simple details about it. I like that it has the simple mock neck, which goes a little bit higher on your neck than like a usual tee would. I like that it has these short and fitted sleeves, and the raglan increases just look so clean and neat. And the entire thing is also done in a broken rib, so you'll alternate between knitting just plain stockinette, knitting all the way around the row, and knitting ribbing. So I think that fact actually made the project go much more quickly for me versus if the entire thing had been in 2x2 ribbing, just because I had those rounds where I could rest my hands a little bit more and not be doing ribbing the entire time. And so I not only enjoy the result of this process, I actually really enjoyed knitting this as well. To give a quick recap on what I thought of both the pattern and the yarn, first of all, I just loved the simplicity of this design. As you guys know, I have ranted about it many times. I think that it's just such a cute design and I love how mine came out. The pattern I think was relatively well written. I did have a little bit of confusion with the instructions for the sleeve decreases, and so I actually ended up just kind of freehanding them and doing decreases on my own the way that I thought they should be done. I think the confusion for me was mostly in the couple of setup rounds to start the sleeve decreases, because you had to kind of get your stitches into the correct format. And I just got a little bit confused and I ended up not following them, which I think actually I saw someone else on Ravelry did the same thing. So that was the only spot where I had a little bit of confusion. I thought it was pretty straightforward to just figure out how to do the decreases on your own. However, if you are someone who is more of a beginner, I think that might be a little bit of a confusing spot for you. So just a heads up as to that. Otherwise, I think I changed the cast on and bind off method to just use like regular cast on and bind off, because I don't really love doing like a tubular cast on or bind off. And I honestly think that it looks totally fine with just a normal cast on and bind off as well. I did use Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off because I wanted to make sure that the shirt could easily get over my head, and it is super stretchy. Like, I don't have any issues with getting it over my head. But otherwise I just followed the pattern to a T and I think it worked really nicely. I did do the waist decreases. There are optional decreases along the side of the T just to decrease to your waist measurement. And so I did do those decreases and I think they look really good. And overall, I am just super, super happy with how this came out. And I also like that although you are knitting sleeves for this, they are short sleeves, so they go by so quickly. It was kind of nice to get that quick satisfaction when I was able to do the sleeves and finish each of them in like 30 minutes or an hour. It was just a quick little dopamine rush to finish those sleeves. So all in all, I really enjoyed this pattern. I really enjoyed making this design. I used Yarnalia Skylark for this project, which is a wool fingering weight yarn, and my last podcast episode was actually sponsored by Yarnalia, so I do have a discount code for them if you want to use it. However, this podcast episode is not sponsored, and since actually completing this project, I do really like the look of the Yarnalia. I think that it just has a little bit of that tweedy variety in it, which I love, but it isn't hand dyed, so it's not going to be as expensive as hand dyed, which I think is really awesome. I do want to say, for such a tight knitting tee, in the future I think I'll try to experiment a little bit more with maybe using like a wool cotton blend, or just something that is a little bit more than just 100% wool, because it is a tiny bit itchy. But that being said, I feel like I knew that when I cast it on. Whenever you cast on like a tight knitting tee or tank with 100% wool, you know that it's going to be a little bit itchier. So I feel like that is something that I might try and experiment with different types of fibers in the future. But all in all, that's definitely not going to stop me from wearing this. Up next, I am really excited to share this next update with you guys. So if you guys have been following me on here or on Instagram for a while, you will know that I have been working on my Moby sweater for a super long time. So the Moby sweater is a pattern by Petite Knit, and it is this really complex cabled sweater. And I had been looking at this pattern for a while and finally decided to cast it on in March of this year, which I know is a bit of a random time to cast on a sweater. It's a little bit late in the season to start on a sweater, which is why it's hilarious that I am still working on it in June. Just to give a little bit of explanation there, I spent a good bit of the winter, first of all, making a sweater for my mom. I made a sweater for my mom for Christmas, and that took me pretty much all of like November and December. And then after that, I decided I wanted to make a design of my own, which is the heartless top. And I spent a good bit of the winter doing that. So by the time I finished the heartless top, I was like, man, I really wanted to like knit a sweater for myself this year. And it just feels a little bit late in the year to do it, but I decided to just go ahead and start one because I wanted to make myself a sweater. I did think that it was going to be finished a little bit sooner. I thought it would take like a month to a month and a half, but because I made the Luna tee in the middle, it did take me quite a while to get it done. However, that being said, I have good news and I have bad news about the sweater. I will start with the good news, which is that I just cast off the Moby sweater and I'm so excited about it. However, I do have a little bit of not so great news about it. The first thing is that you can definitely see it on the camera, but there is a spot where I switched between 2 different dye lots of yarn and it caused a very clear stripe. So I think you can definitely see it on camera, probably even better than in real life. But as you can see, there is just a stripe here where I changed dye lots. What I will say is that it's a bit more subtle in person, and it is subtle enough that I made the choice that I didn't want to pull out like a third of the body and totally redo it just to stop that stripe from being visible. However, I feel a little bit stupid because this is actually a mistake that I made very recently. I made this mistake as well with my mom's sweater that I made for her back in December. I can sit here and give explanations as to why I didn't think it would happen in this case, mainly because I thought that this would be more of a problem with hand-dyed yarn, and I didn't realize that with non-hand-dyed yarn, such as in the case of this Lily Kate Makes Axis, I didn't realize that it would really be possible to have yarns of 2 different dye lots that looked pretty different. And now I know that that is the case. I'm definitely a bit annoyed with myself for not being more careful, especially after this happened to me so recently. After I made my mom's sweater and made the mistake of using 2 different dye lots that looked drastically different, I switched over to using something called helical knitting, which is where when you are getting close to finishing 1 ball of yarn, you start knitting, just alternating the 2 balls of yarn. And helical knitting is this really cool technique where you're going to switch between 2 balls of yarn, but you're not going to alternate them at the exact same spot in the round. The spot is going to move over time. It's a little bit hard for me to explain, but maybe I'll link a tutorial down below which will show it a little bit better. However, since I discovered this technique, I have been seriously obsessed with it. It is the best way to switch between 2 balls of yarn in the case of trying to avoid a line where you switch balls of yarn, and I just really have loved it since I discovered it. That being said, I did not use helical knitting on this sweater where I switched the 2 balls of yarn, and I think you can really see the line. But because it is a little bit more subtle in person, I think I'm just going to leave it. It is totally possible that in the future I will decide that I cannot live with this sweater having a stripe in it and will end up pulling it out and redoing it. But considering especially how long this sweater has taken me and the fact that I have other projects that I want to work on, for the time being, I think I'm just going to leave it and see if it sort of deters me from wearing the sweater at all. I really hope that it doesn't, but if it does, then maybe I'll go back and fix it in the future. Another thing about this sweater is that, first of all, I haven't blogged it quite yet. I quite literally cast it off last night, so just in time for this podcast episode. But one more thing is that when I cast it off, I used the Italian bind-off method, which is suggested by Petite Knit for casting off the body and the sleeves, and I think it looks very nice and clean. Unfortunately, however, when I tried on the sweater, I realized that I cast off a bit tighter than I should have, and that's especially frustrating to me because I am going to block the sweater and I think it's going to grow a bit, in which case the tight bind off is going to be even more of a problem. So I didn't quite pull out the bind off yet because I think I want to block it first and sort of verify that the bind off is itself a problem, and then I can fix it. That, and I know it's going to be a little bit annoying to have to redo the bind off, especially because I'll have to pull out the Italian bind off, which is just not going to be fun. So I'm just going to put it off for a few more days while I block it, and then I will probably get around to fixing it. So all in all, there are a couple of minor problems with this sweater that I am hoping to, at least the bind off I'm hoping to resolve. The switching colors, I don't know if I'm going to fix now or sometime in the future. But for now, I feel like I've just come to a bit of an emotional wall with this project where I just don't want to be working on it for much longer. I really thought that the sweater was going to be done much sooner, and I feel like sometimes when I have that feeling of like, man, this project should have been done months ago, I will just get to a point where I feel emotionally done with it for the time being, and that's where I'm at with this sweater. I will say, despite that feeling that I have at the moment, I did have a lot of fun making this sweater. This is a really fun pattern, and I absolutely love all of the different textural elements with it. It has the cables, the mock cables, the double seed stitch, the twisted stitches. I just think it is an absolutely gorgeous pattern, and it was also really fun to knit. I also love the finishing with the folded over neckline, the Italian bind off on the sleeves and the body. I just think it looks very clean and tailored and sort of like a store-bought sweater. So I think those details are really important to me. And just to also recap what I thought of the pattern and of the yarn. So the pattern is by Petite Knit. It is my first time knitting a Petite Knit pattern, and I thought it was pretty well written. There were a couple of spots where I was slightly confused. Namely, I think when I first started the sweater, it had instructions for German short rows, and I understood those instructions after looking at it for a bit because I had done German short rows before, but I think if you haven't done them before, it might be a little bit confusing. The other step of the pattern that I found to be a little bit confusing was that once you get to like the main body, Petite Knit had separate charts for different parts of the sweater. So like there would be a chart for this mock cable in the center, and then a chart for this cable on the side, and those were separate charts. So there was a spot in the pattern where you had to sort of sync up which charts you're using to connect the front and the back, and I found that to be a tiny bit confusing as well. Eventually I ended up figuring it out and everything worked out fine, but I do think if you are more of a beginner knitter, this pattern might be a bit confusing to you at times. And I think that also just goes without saying because this is a bit more of a complex pattern with so many different cables and textural elements. So definitely I think this pattern is written a bit more for an intermediate to advanced knitter. However, despite those small confusions, I think all in all, I did really enjoy this pattern. I think just given how complex this pattern is, it was pretty well laid out. For the yarn in the sweater, I used Lily Kate Makes Axis in Penumbra, and I really like this yarn. I feel like it's a little bit more rustic looking. It just like has some fibers coming off of the main strand of yarn, which I think looks really good for kind of an Aran cabled sweater like this, because I think of these kinds of sweaters as something a little bit more rustic, something you would wear in like rural Ireland. So to me, I feel like the vibes of that yarn sort of match with what I was making with it, which I think is awesome. And all in all, I liked this yarn. I don't really have any complaints. It was a joy to knit with, and I think it looks really good in the finished project. The only slight complaint that I had with it was the 2 different dye lots, but that was more of a mistake on my part and less so on the company's part. So all in all, I really liked the yarn and the pattern, and I'm so excited to block this to see how it actually looks, because I did try this on and it looks a little bit more fitted than I expected, but I believe that's just because I haven't blocked it yet and it will grow a bit. For the next part of this podcast, I actually wanted to add in some more segments that I haven't done in the past, just because I feel like the only things I really usually talk about in my podcast are my current whips and FOs, and then the media that I consume while I'm doing this knitting. And while I would like to keep both of those segments, I think it would also be fun to add in a few more segments where I talk about some other knitting related things, or even just things about my own life that I want to talk about. So the first thing I wanted to add in is kind of a 2-in-1 segment, which is going to be acquisitions. So any new yarn or any new notions or anything that I've acquired since my last podcast episode, and then also future plans for knitting. So I feel like these two can kind of go hand in hand, because a lot of the time the yarn that I buy is going to be something that I'm using directly for a future project. So I feel like these two segments can kind of go together, and sometimes I might not have any acquisitions or any future plans, but if I don't, I can just skip over that part of the podcast. That being said, I do have a couple of things to talk about in this segment today. So I actually recently posted a reel about this, so if you guys have already seen this reel, then you will already have a lot of context as to what this project is. However, if you haven't, I'm gonna go ahead and put the reel up on the screen here. Come make my Eras Tour costume with me. Hi, my name is Emma, and my 2 main personality traits are that I'm a Swiftie and a knitter. So obviously I decided I wanted to knit a fun, elaborate costume when I see Taylor Swift in concert this July. To give a bit of backstory here, 2 of my absolute favorite Taylor Swift albums are Folklore and Evermore. And in particular, I love the song Ivy from Evermore. So I wanted to make a costume inspired by this beautiful green dress that Taylor wears sometimes for her folklore set, which I also think perfectly matches the vibes of Ivy. Unfortunately, I do not have the time nor the energy to knit an entire floor-length dress, so I figured I would just knit the top part of the dress and wear this green silk mini skirt on the bottom. I also realized I had this failed tank top attempt sitting around, which matched the color of the skirt pretty well, so I'm planning to use the yarn from this tank top to knit the top. However, I also wanted to buy some green mohair yarn to make the sheer panel that the dress has, so I went ahead and ordered this pretty Madeline Tash yarn. I'm gonna keep showing my process of making this costume for the next 2 months, so follow for part 2. So I have a couple of updates on this project. First of all, I pulled out the project that I had been wanting to frog to use this yarn as the main yarn for the project. So this yarn is the Tippy Tree Super DK in the color Pixie. I absolutely love this color. I think it is just the perfect like matcha green color, and I think it's going to work so beautifully for this costume. And I just couldn't stand the thought of this yarn just sitting around on my abandoned whip for the rest of my life. So I decided it was finally time to go ahead and pull this out and use this yarn for a new project. So that is my first update. And the other thing I did is that I ordered some mohair online. So as you can see in Taylor's dress, there's this panel in the center of the dress where it is sort of translucent. You can see her skin. I decided for my version of the top slash dress, I wanted to do just a mohair panel where it's a little bit more sheer as opposed to being completely cut out. And so I ordered some mohair yarn that is a similar color to the green yarn I'm using for the body. And as you can see, I think it is a pretty good color match. I do think that the mohair yarn is a little bit more saturated and a little bit brighter, but given the fact that it's going to be used on a sheer panel anyways, I think that it's going to look like a pretty good color match when I actually knit the fabric of the top. So I'm pretty happy with this yarn that I got. I think it's going to work really well for the top. And this yarn is Rowan Kid Silk Haze in the color Apple. So that being said, now that I have finally bound off my Moby sweater, it is finally time for me to start on this project. And I just want to be totally honest with you guys, I'm a little bit nervous about finishing this project on time for my concert. So you guys know that I've already been to the Eras Tour and I'm very lucky to go a couple of times. That being said, my Eras Tour date is July 22nd and it is currently June 25th. So I do not have a lot of time to finish this project. And especially if I have any setbacks where I have to frog the project and redo things multiple times, I am really nervous about finishing it on time. I do think it should be enough time to like physically finish knitting it, considering the fact that I've made this fingering weight top in about a month. But I am a little bit nervous just in terms of if I have to pull anything out, I think that will cause me to not finish or to finish at the very last minute. Another thing is that I am very lucky to have the entire week of 4th of July off because my job just gives that week off for everyone. So I think that is going to hopefully, fingers crossed, be my saving grace in terms of finishing this project, just in that I'll have a bit more time to sit around and be working on this project. So I really hope that I do have enough time to finish it. I am a little bit nervous. To be honest, that is kind of it in terms of my project plans and acquisitions in the near future. I really need to just be totally heads down on this project and trying to finish it on time. So that is kind of all that I'm really focusing on at the moment. The last segment on my podcast that I wanted to go into is media that I've been consuming. This is a little segment that I think is just fun to talk about because I'm a person who watches a lot of TV while I'm knitting, and sometimes I also like listen to music or listen to audiobooks. So I think it's just fun to talk about what I've been consuming while I'm doing my knitting. And for right now, I have a couple of things to talk about. So the first TV show that I've been watching recently is Big Little Lies. I actually literally just finished watching this TV show and I watched it in such a short amount of time. It was like just a few days of me watching it and I totally completed it. So Big Little Lies is essentially a TV show about a group of relatively wealthy moms in Monterey, and I actually live in Northern California and used to live in the Bay Area, so this is kind of a funny thing for me to watch, just knowing like what the culture is like in the Bay Area. And this show in particular is about the group of moms and sort of the drama and relationships that happen between this group of people. I thought it was a really fun watch. I will say a little bit of a trigger warning for the first season. There is a bit of abuse that happens in one of the relationships, and I found that at times to be a bit uncomfortable to watch. It was just really hard to watch, being really scared for this one character's life. Honestly, every time those two characters in that relationship came up on the screen, I just like physically didn't want to watch it because I was like, I know something bad's gonna happen, like there's going to be someone getting hurt, and I just didn't want to watch it. So I found that part to be a little bit difficult to watch. However, aside from that, I enjoyed the show, and I feel like that was kind of a very important part of the show. And in a way, I'm glad that they showed this abuse and they didn't sort of romanticize it or try to hide some of the ugliness of it. However, that being said, I did find that part a little bit difficult to watch. Overall, it has a really amazing cast of people in the show. It has, the main characters are Reese Witherspoon, Shailene Woodley, Laura Dern, Nicole Kidman, and Zoe Kravitz. So it just has an absolutely stacked cast of actresses who are really, really talented. And overall, it was a really good watch and one that I would recommend, especially if you're looking for like just a relatively short show to get through in like a weekend or a week. It's only 2 seasons and each season is 7 episodes. So it was very quick to watch and overall a good show. The other show that I've been watching at the moment is Only Murders in the Building. So first of all, I want to say, please don't put any spoilers in the comments because I have not finished watching the show. I've only watched season 1. But this is a really, really fun show. It is a show about 3 people living in a building together. It is 2 older men, played by Steve Martin and Martin Short, and then a younger woman, played by Selena Gomez. And all 3 of these characters are interested in murder mystery podcasts and sort of bond over that fact. And simultaneously, they find out that there is a murder that was committed in their building. So they decide to make a podcast of the 3 of them investigating this murder and trying to figure out what happened. So this is just a really fun show. I want to say actually for both Big Little Lies and Only Murders in the Building, I feel like the shows are sort of filmed and edited in a bit of a creative way, which I think is really fun. For Only Murders in the Building, there are kind of moments where they have these like ongoing bits and they will sort of show the characters engaging in these bits. And it's kind of like this really artsy, fun thing. And there was also an entire episode in Only Murders in the Building where it was from a deaf character's point of view. And the entire episode was just no talking, completely silent until the very end, which I thought was really fun. Also for Big Little Lies, they have this really cool editing style where they will show characters having these kind of flashes, thinking back to earlier moments, and they will just have very quick cuts between the older moments and the memories and then the present day, which I think is really cool and very artsy as well. So I found the sort of editing and cinematography of these 2 shows to be pretty interesting. Only Murders in the Building, I've only watched 1 season of it, so I still need to get through with the next season. But I really enjoyed the first season. I thought it was just a fun little show to watch and pretty interesting to see them unravel the mystery. So yeah, those are 2 shows that are relatively short and I think are just good recommendations if you're looking for kind of a shorter show to get through. You guys know I love my very long shows, such as Supernatural, which was 15 seasons, so I might get into a longer show in the near future, but for the time being, I'm just kind of alternating between these slightly shorter shows that I can kind of get my feet wet in without having to commit to watching a show for like an entire year. I think that is it for all of my updates today, so I want to say thank you guys so much for watching. I have been really happy with how my channel is doing recently. I feel like I've just had a little bit more like consistent viewership and people supporting my channel, which means a lot to me. If you're still watching, I would love if you commented down below something with the word cable in it. Just because I recently did this on my vlog video that I posted a couple weeks ago, and I got so many comments that were so fun to read through. I especially loved it when people like concealed the word within their comment. I thought that was really clever and fun. Otherwise, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!